Don't speak. Homeless black woman saves four-star general after hearing something shocking on the street. Don't speak, just listen, Diane whispered hoarsely. Holding General Patterson's arm tightly, the man in the impeccable uniform with 4 gold stars shining on his chest had just stepped out of his armored limousine when the ragged figure emerged from the shadows of an alley in Washington, D.C. The general's first reaction was one of obvious contempt. His eyes quickly scanned the black woman in her mid-40s with unkempt hair, dirty clothes, and a shopping cart full of belongings. Just another beggar in the capital trying to get a few coins from a high-ranking officer. Let go of me immediately, or I'll call security. Patterson growled, trying to break free. Diane didn't let go. His eyes burned with an urgency that made the general hesitate for a split second. There's a laser sight pointed right at his chest, she whispered, pressing him against the marble wall of the Pentagon. 3 snipers, building across the street. Second window on the left. Follow my voice. Patterson felt a chill run down his spine. Not because of her words, but because of the way they were spoken. The military precision, the tactical knowledge, the deadly calm of someone who had been in war zones. This was no ordinary beggar. Who are you? He asked quietly, now paying attention to the suspicious reflections in the windows of the building across the street. Diane didn't answer directly. Instead, she began to carefully guide him along the wall, using his own body as a human shield. Do you know Colonel James Mitchell? She asked, keeping her eyes fixed on the distant windows. General Patterson swallowed hard. Mitchell had been his right-hand man for 10 years, the man he trusted most at the Pentagon. How do you? Because I heard he was planning your assassination 2 hours ago at that cafe on the corner. Diane cut in discreetly, pointing to an elegant establishment frequented by the military elite. He and 3 other officers. They think you know too much about illegal arms sales to Mexican cartels. Diane Santos was 45 years old, and never imagined that 20 years of military service in the Special Forces would prepare her to save a general's life while pretending to be homeless. But life on the streets of D.C. had taught her that the best information circulates in places where no one notices her presence. At that moment, as she led the general to safety via a route that only someone with military training would know, Diane knew she had just exposed herself for 2 years. She'd gathered information about military corruption by pretending to be invisible. Now, on an impulse of conscience, she had thrown it all away to save a man who would probably despise her as soon as he found out who she really was. His limousine is compromised, she whispered, guiding him through a side entrance. The driver is also on his payroll. Do you have a secure phone? Patterson looked at her with a mixture of shock and growing respect. In 30 years of military service, he had never met anyone who displayed this level of tactical knowledge while pretending to be a beggar. But it was when Diane whispered the specific details of the conversation she had overheard, exact amounts transferred, names of contacts in Mexico, dates of future operations, that the general realized he was dealing with something much bigger than a simple warning of danger. What General Patterson didn't know was that the woman who had just saved his life carried secrets that could bring down half the military high command. And what Diane didn't know was that her impulsive decision to act had set in motion a chain of events that would transform her life of invisibility into something completely different. As they walked through the shadows toward a safe exit, a single question echoed in the air. What was a highly trained woman doing pretending to be homeless on the streets of the American capital for 2 years? If this story of courage and military secrets has piqued your curiosity, be sure to subscribe to the channel to find out how a person discarded by society can carry information capable of shaking the most powerful structures in the country. 20 minutes later in the Pentagon security bunker, General Patterson watched Diane with an expression that oscillated between fascination and utter distrust. Her, who had saved his life, remained calm, completely ignoring the curious glances of the security agents. Colonel James Mitchell, Major Robert Hayes, Captain Linda Torres, and Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Moore, she recited from memory without consulting her notes. They meet every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. at Cafe Alexandria, corner table, always the same one. Patterson felt his stomach churn. These were some of his most trusted officers, people with whom he had shared classified information for years. How do you know this? Diane gave a bitter smile. Because for 2 years, I was her invisible self that they stepped over as they left the cafe. Black, dirty, homeless, perfect for ignoring while they talked about million-dollar wire transfers to accounts in Panama. The general leaned forward. Who are you really? Major Diane Santos, Special Forces. Retired on disability 3 years ago, she replied curtly. Officially, I suffered a nervous breakdown after an unsuccessful mission in Afghanistan. Unofficially, I discovered that my own unit was selling American weapons to terrorist groups. And when I tried to report it, she paused, her eyes hardening. Let's just say accidents happen in war zones, especially to people who ask inconvenient questions. Patterson swallowed hard. Are you telling me you faked mental incapacity to investigate military corruption? I didn't fake anything, Diane corrected coldly. I really did have a breakdown. Finding out that people you trusted were profiting from the deaths of American soldiers tends to mess with his head. The difference is that during his recovery, he realized that being invisible had its advantages. At that moment, an assistant rushed in. General, we have a problem. Colonel Mitchell is requesting an urgent meeting. She says there is a security threat related to you. Diane and Patterson exchanged meaningful glances. What kind of threat? Asked the general. A mentally unstable woman approached you earlier. She's a former military officer with a history of psychotic episodes. The colonel is concerned that she may have spread false information to cause panic. Patterson's blood boiled. Mitchell wasn't just trying to kill him. He was laying the groundwork to discredit any information Diane might provide. The move was brilliant and despicable at the same time. That son of a he began, but Diane interrupted him. Calm down. Let him come. In fact, it's exactly what we need. His tone was icy, calculating. You see, General, during 2 years of gathering information on the streets, I learned that the best way to catch rats is to let them feel safe in their burrows. She stood up and walked over to the bulletproof window. Mitchell will try to paint me as crazy. He'll say I'm dangerous, that his military record is questionable, that nothing I say can be trusted. And how do you plan to prove he's lying? Diane took a small digital recording device out of her pocket. A high-tech military model, not something an ordinary homeless person would have, because for 2 years, I recorded every conversation, photographed every document they dropped, mapped every meeting. She turned to the general with a look that mixed pain and iron determination. You know what's funny? They literally threw important papers in the street trash, assuming no bum would be smart enough to understand their importance. Racism and arrogance are a dangerous combination, General, the assistant returned. His sir, Colonel Mitchell, has arrived. He brought 2 military doctors and a representative from the psychological department. Patterson smiled for the first time since the crisis began. How convenient. Tell the colonel that I'm eager to hear him out. Diane put away the recorder and discreetly moved to a corner of the room, resuming the hunched posture and vacant stare of a person with mental problems. The transformation was instantaneous and frighteningly convincing. One thing, General, she whispered before Mitchell entered. When this is all over, I want only one thing in return. What? Justice for the soldiers who died because these vermin sold defective equipment. For the families who never knew the truth. For every person like me who tried to do the right thing and was destroyed by the system. The door opened, and Colonel James Mitchell entered with the confidence of a man who believes he holds all the cards. Tall, imposing, impeccably uniformed, and wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. General Patterson. What a relief to see him safe. When we heard about the incident with Major Santos, he paused dramatically, looking at Diane with an expression of calculated pity. Well, we feared the worst. What Mitchell didn't know was that every word coming out of her mouth was being recorded, and that the crazy woman in the corner of the room had spent the last 2 years meticulously documenting every move of the operation he was leading. Diane kept her head down, but his eyes sparkled with a satisfaction that few could recognize. Because after years of pretending to be invisible, the time had finally come to become unforgettable. General Patterson watched Mitchell's performance with growing disgust, realizing how he had been manipulated for years by someone he considered a brother in arms. And as the colonel continued her carefully rehearsed narrative about Diane's mental instability, a single question echoed in the minds of everyone present. What happens when the predator realizes he has been lured into the perfect trap by someone he considered just another helpless prey? The answer was about to completely redraw the Pentagon's power map, and Mitchell still had no idea that he had just signed her own life sentence. Major Santos, it's good to see you again, Mitchell said in a honeyed voice, feigning compassion. I know you've been going through a difficult time since the incident in Afghanistan. Diane kept her head down, occasionally swaying as if she were hearing voices, a performance she had perfected over months on the streets. Mitchell took the bait completely, General. As you can see, Major Santos suffered a severe breakdown after a failed mission. She lost 8 men because of an impulsive decision her made. Since then, she has developed persecuto-paranoia and conspiratorial tendencies. Dr. Harrison, a military psychiatrist Mitchell had brought in, nodded gravely. I've treated similar cases. Traumatized veterans often create elaborate fantasies where they are misunderstood heroes fighting imaginary conspiracies. Patterson watched Mitchell carefully. The man he had considered a brother for 10 years spoke about Diane with a contempt that bordered on sadism. Every word confirmed the general's growing suspicions. Colonel, Patterson interrupted, How did you learn about today's incident so quickly? Mitchell hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough for Diane to notice and file away mentally. Well, I have contacts in building security. When they learned that an unstable ex-military woman had approached you. Interesting, murmured the general, because standard protocol would be to inform him first, not his subordinate. The psychiatrist cleared his throat uncomfortably. General, perhaps we should focus on Major Santos. She poses a risk not only to you, but to herself. It was then that Diane lifted her head slightly, allowing Mitchell to see his eyes for the first time. For a moment, the mask of madness slipped, revealing a sharp intelligence that made the colonel instinctively recoil. You know what's funny, Colonel? She said in a clear voice, abandoning the pretense. For 2 years, he's walked past her dozens of times. He literally stepped on her once when he was rushing to meet his Mexican contacts. The blood drained from Mitchell's face. What are you talking about? Diane rose slowly, all pretense of instability gone. I'm talking about last Thursday's meeting at Cafe Alexandria, corner table as usual. You, Hayes, Torres, and more. Discussing Tuesday's shipment. She's delusional, Mitchell stammered, but her voice betrayed her growing nervousness. Shipment of modified M4A1 rifles with scratched serial numbers. Destination, Jerez cartel, value 2.3 million. Her commission 15%. Diane recited the details as if reading a military report. The psychiatrist looked confusedly among those present. This was clearly not in the script Mitchell had given her. Patterson felt a mixture of admiration and horror. 2 years collecting evidence, Jesus Christ, actually. It was 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days, Diane corrected dryly. And before you ask, Colonel, yes, I recorded everything. Mitchell finally exploded. You don't have... She's a crazy beggar. Who has a bachelor's degree in engineering from West Point, a master's degree in military strategy, and speaks 4 languages fluently? Diane interrupted with a cold smile. Or are you referring to the crazy beggar who hacked into his personal emails 6 months ago? The silence in the room was deafening. Diane walked over to a folder she had discreetly left next to her chair, something no one had noticed in the initial confusion. Want to know what else I found out during my street investigation, Mitchell? She opened the folder, revealing hundreds of meticulously organized pages. I discovered that Captain Jennifer Walsh did not die in combat in Afghanistan. As you reported, Mitchell turned completely pale. Her findings were that you were selling defective weapons, equipment that failed on purpose to force new purchases, soldiers dying with weapons that simply wouldn't fire when they needed them. Patterson felt nauseous. Jennifer Walsh. She was one of my best officers, Diane confirmed, her voice heavy with controlled pain, until he tried to expose Mitchell and his friends. Then she suffered a very convenient accident during a routine patrol. The general looked at Mitchell with growing horror. You killed an American officer, that's absurd, Mitchell shouted. But the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. She's making this up. Diane took a tablet out of her briefcase. I have the emails where you planned Captain Walsh's accident. I have the bank transfers. I have recordings of you laughing about how she learned not to ask inconvenient questions. At that moment, the door opened and a tall man in a dark suit entered. Patterson recognized him immediately. Agent Davis of the FBI. Sorry to interrupt, Davis said calmly. But we've received some very interesting information about irregular military operations. Mitchell looked desperately between Davis and Diane. Finally understanding the extent of the trap. You set this up, actually, said Diane, pulling a small transmitter from her pocket. Everything that he said in the last 20 minutes has been transmitted directly to the Army Criminal Investigation Department. They've been listening for quite some time. The psychiatrist Mitchell had brought with him stood up abruptly. I didn't know anything about this. He just told me she was a veteran with mental health issues. Davis nodded. Dr. Harrison, you are not under investigation. We know you were misled. It was then that Mitchell played his last desperate card. You can't prove anything. It's the word of a homeless woman against a decorated officer. Diane smiled, not a bitter smile but one of deep satisfaction. Mitchell, you just confessed to knowledge of operations that officially don't exist. And you did so while being recorded by the FBI. The colonel realized too late that he had been manipulated into revealing information that only someone guilty would know. Davis approached with handcuffs. Colonel Mitchell, you are under arrest for treason, murder of a military officer, international arms trafficking, and corruption. You have the right to remain silent. As Mitchell was handcuffed, he looked at Diane with pure hatred. You destroyed his own career to get him. Is that what you got for her sick obsession? Diane stared back at him serenely. Actually, I destroyed my career to save the lives of innocent soldiers, to bring justice for Jennifer Walsh and all the others you killed for greed. Patterson watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and shame for having been deceived for so long. What none of them knew yet was that Mitchell's arrest was only the first domino to fall during her 2 years on the streets. Diane had mapped out a network of corruption that extended to the highest echelons of the Pentagon. And as Mitchell was led away in handcuffs, one question echoed in everyone's mind. If a woman pretending to be invisible had managed to dismantle such a complex operation, what other secrets were still waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of Washington? Diane's chess game was just beginning, and Mitchell had just realized that he had never been the player. He had always been just a pawn being moved by someone infinitely more intelligent than he. 3 hours after Mitchell's arrest, General Patterson's phone wouldn't stop ringing. The first call came from the Secretary of Defense, the second from the White House. The third was from an investigative journalist who somehow already had details about the operation. How the hell did the press find out so quickly? Patterson asked Agent Davis, who remained in the room watching Diane meticulously organize her evidence. Diane looked up with a smile that mixed satisfaction and exhaustion. Because during 2 years of gathering information, I didn't just build a case against Mitchell. I built a network. She opened another laptop. High-tech military equipment that definitely didn't belong to a homeless person. Do you know the journalist Marcus Thompson from the Washington Herald? He's been investigating military corruption for 5 years. I've been feeding information selected for him for months. During these 2 years of pretending to be invisible, he mapped out a network of corruption ranging from illegal arms sales to overpriced contracts with shell companies. The phone rang again. Patterson answered it, and his expression turned to growing horror. I see. Yes. I'll be there in an hour. He hung up and looked at Diane. Colonel Hayes has just been arrested at his home. Captain Torres was detained at the airport trying to flee to Mexico, and Lieutenant Colonel Moore, suicide. Diane asked calmly. How did you know? Because I analyzed her psychological profile during 2 years of observation. Moore was always the most emotionally fragile. When he realized there was no way out, it was the most likely reaction. Davis approached, impressed. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Major Santos, in 20 years with the FBI, I've never seen such a meticulous intelligence operation conducted by a single person. Diane closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. It wasn't just him, I had help. What kind of help? Just then, the door opened and a woman in her 50s entered. Her gray hair impeccably styled, carrying herself with the poise of someone accustomed to power. Patterson recognized her immediately. Senator Elizabeth Warren Morrison. She introduced herself, extending her hand to a general. Chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the general pulled. Senator, I didn't know you were involved in this investigation. Because officially I'm not, she replied curtly. Unofficially, I've been working with Major Santos for 18 months. Diane smiled for the first time since the operation began. General, meet my secret ally, the person who provided resources, equipment, and legal cover for this investigation. Morrison sat down elegantly. You know, General, it's interesting how people underestimate intelligent women, especially when one is black and pretends to be homeless, and the other is a politician and supposedly just another feminist causing trouble. Patterson felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. You planned all this, not all of it, Diane corrected. The attempt on her life today was real. Mitchell really did want to kill him because he was asking inconvenient questions about the arms contracts. But when I realized he would accelerate the plan after he became suspicious, I used that as an opportunity. Davis's phone rang. He answered it, muttered a few words, and hung up with a grim expression. Major Santos, I need to inform you that Mitchell's lawyer is claiming that all the evidence was obtained illegally. He's arguing that she didn't have the authority to conduct surveillance operations. Morrison laughed, a cold, dangerous sound. Interesting. Because technically, during the entire investigation period, Major Santos was working under my authority as an unofficial special advisor to the Senate committee. She took a document out of her briefcase. Here is the retroactive authorization signed by me and validated by the Attorney General's office last night. Completely legal. Davis examined the papers with growing admiration. That's extraordinary. It's necessary. Morrison corrected coldly. For years, men like Mitchell have exploited legal loopholes and institutional privileges to escape justice. Sometimes you have to use the same tools against him. At that moment, an assistant rushed in. General, the Pentagon press room is packed. Reporters are asking about a cleanup operation involving multiple high-ranking officers. Patterson looked desperately at Diane and Morrison. What does he tell them? Morrison stood up with the authority of someone who had run political campaigns for decades. The truth, that the U.S. Army does not tolerate corruption regardless of rank, that justice has been served. Another phone rang. This time Diane's personal cell phone. She looked at the screen, and his face lit up for the first time in days. Hello, Jennifer. Patterson froze. Jennifer? You said Jennifer Walsh was dead? Diane covered the phone and whispered, "Captain Jennifer Walsh is very much alive. She's been in special protection for 3 years after we faked her death to protect her while we gathered evidence." The call continued for a few minutes with Diane taking quick notes. When she hung up, his smile was genuine. Jennifer just confirmed that all of the international co-conspirators were arrested simultaneously in a coordinated operation between the FBI, CIA, and Interpol. The entire network has been dismantled. Davis shook his head in admiration. "You orchestrated an international operation while one of his pretended to be homeless and the other pretended to be a senator, concerned only with domestic issues." "Actually," Morrison said with a predatory smile, "I really am a senator concerned with domestic issues. It's just that domestic issues include traders selling American weapons to Mexican cartels." The assistant returned, this time with an even more urgent expression. "General, we just received information that Colonel Mitchell has suffered a nervous breakdown in prison. He's screaming that he was betrayed by a crazy beggar and demanding to speak to a psychiatrist." Diane rose slowly, walking to the window overlooking the Pentagon courtyard. For 2 years, she had watched that same courtyard from different angles. Always from the shadows, always unseen. "You know what's most ironic, General?" she said without turning around. "All this time, Mitchell walked past me hundreds of times. He literally trampled me once when he was rushing to a meeting with Mexican contacts. I was less than nothing. Just another disposable obstacle in her privileged life." She turned, her eyes shining with a satisfaction that went far beyond personal revenge. Today, when they took him away in handcuffs, he looked at her with pure hatred and asked how she had managed to destroy her career. "Do you know what she replied?" Patterson shook his head. "I replied that he had destroyed his own career the moment he decided that some lives were worth more than others, that she had only made the consequences of his choices visible." Morrison looked at Diane with genuine respect. "During my political career, I've met many courageous people, but never anyone who sacrificed as much for justice as you have." "I didn't sacrifice anything," Diane corrected gently. "I invested and today I'm reaping the rewards." Patterson's phone rang one last time. This time her expression changed completely when she heard the words on the other end of the line. "It was the president," he announced when he hung up. "He wants to meet with Major Santos in person tomorrow. Apparently, this operation prevented an international scandal that could have destabilized military alliances across the hemisphere." Diane nodded calmly, as if receiving presidential invitations were routine. As the final details of the operation were organized around her, one question remained in the air. If a woman pretending to be invisible managed to dismantle an international conspiracy and save the integrity of the U.S. Armed Forces, what other unlikely heroes are hiding in the shadows of our society, waiting for the right moment to turn injustice into absolute triumph? Morrison looked out the window at the courtyard where Diane had spent so many days pretending to be forgotten by society and murmured, "Sometimes the angels of justice come disguised as people the world insists on not seeing." 6 months later, Diane Santos walked the halls of the Pentagon wearing an impeccable uniform with the insignia of lieutenant colonel, a special promotion approved directly by the president. Her new role as Director of Military Integrity gave her authority over corruption investigations throughout the system. Mitchell, Hayes, and Torres were serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. The scandal had spread internationally, resulting in the arrest of dozens of Mexican contacts and the seizure of millions of dollars in illegal weapons. The entire network had collapsed during the trial. Mitchell had attempted a last-ditch effort, claiming temporary insanity caused by persecution by an obsessive beggar. The judge responded coldly, "Colonel, the only thing obsessive here was her greed." The psychiatrist Mitchell had brought in to discredit Diane had become one of the prosecution's most important witnesses, describing how he had been manipulated into participating in a sham. "I have never felt so professionally ashamed," he declared in court. Patterson, now a 5-star general, often consulted Diane on sensitive operations. "You saved more than my life," he had said at a public ceremony. "You saved the integrity of an entire institution." Senator Morrison continued to work with Diane on new investigations, identifying networks of corruption that extended beyond the armed forces. Together, they had become a nightmare for any officer who considered profiting from treason. Jennifer Walsh, officially resurrected for military records, now worked alongside Diane, coordinating internal intelligence operations. 3 years of pretending to be dead were worth it when I saw Mitchell convicted, she confided. The case had inspired reforms throughout the military system. New transparency protocols, anonymous reporting channels, and cross-checking systems were implemented, making it virtually impossible to repeat operations like Mitchell's. Diane had an office overlooking the same courtyard where she had spent 2 years pretending to be invisible. On the wall, framed, was the first Washington Herald article exposing the scandal with her photo on the front page. Occasionally, she still visited the streets where she had gathered information, not out of nostalgia, but to remind herself that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that underestimating someone based on appearances can be the most costly mistake a person can make. During a televised interview, the reporter asked, Lieutenant Colonel Santos, what would you say to people who feel invisible or despised by society? Diane smiled with the wisdom of someone who had turned invisibility into a superpower. I would say that being underestimated is a strategic advantage. While they don't see you, you can see everything about he. Mitchell had tried to destroy a woman he considered disposable. Instead, he created the most effective investigator the Pentagon had ever known. Her arrogance had been her complete downfall. The lesson was clear. Never judge someone's worth by their circumstances. The person you despise today may be the very one who will hold your destiny tomorrow. If this story of courage and justice touched his heart, subscribe to the channel for more.